I used to think that love, especially family love, was something that couldn't be measured. But growing up in my grandparents' house taught me that affection could, in fact, be weighed, and somehow I always came up short. My cousins Emma and Nathan were the golden ones. Everything about them seemed brighter, louder, more celebrated. When we were children, Grandma would clap her hands with delight when Emma played the piano, her wrinkled fingers tapping along to the melody as though she were watching a performance in some grand concert hall. When Nathan came home with a new medal from his school's football team, Grandpa would lift him onto his shoulders, announcing to everyone that a true Mitchell man never fails. And then there was me, Lily, the quiet one who sat in the corner, clapping for others while no one ever clapped for me. I wasn't neglected in a cruel, obvious way. It was quieter than that, subtle, like being erased with an invisible eraser bit by bit. I was always present, always polite, always trying to earn a glance, a word of praise, a simple sign that I mattered. But Grandma's attention would always drift back to Emma, her perfect little pianist, and Grandpa's laughter would follow Nathan wherever he went. My mother noticed, of course. She'd pat my back and say softly, "Don't take it personally, sweetheart. They just prefer your uncle's family." But I couldn't help it. Every time I came home from school clutching a report card full of A's or a certificate for best essay, Grandma would smile distractedly and say, "That's nice, dear." Did you see Emma's piano recital? The newspaper wrote about it. I tried not to envy them. I really did. I told myself that love wasn't a competition, that if I kept being kind, they'd see me differently one day. But as the years passed, I learned that some people don't see you at all, not until they need something from you. That truth hit hardest when Grandpa fell ill. He had always been a stoic man, the kind who carried his pain quietly. But one winter, his health began to crumble like paper under the rain. Suddenly, the house that had once been full of chatter became quiet and heavy with the smell of medicine. My cousins, the adored ones, came around less often. Emma was busy with college and her important performances. Nathan was traveling for work, or so he said. The task of caring for Grandpa fell to me and my mother. I didn't hesitate. Despite everything, I loved him. I remembered the little moments, the times he'd let me sit beside him in the garden while he read, or how he'd hum softly under his breath when fixing his old watch. There was a warmth in him, buried deep beneath pride and tradition. I wanted to believe that caring for him would finally make him see me. Those months were exhausting but strangely peaceful. I'd wake before dawn to prepare his tea, sit by his bedside reading aloud from the books he used to love, and adjust his pillows when he coughed. Sometimes he'd reach for my hand without speaking, his eyes softening in a way that made me think, just maybe, he was trying to apologize for something he couldn't say. My mother would catch those moments and smile faintly, as if she too saw the beginning of healing between us. Then, one evening, I overheard my uncle in the hallway. He'd come to visit, his voice sharp with irritation. "She doesn't need to be here all the time," he snapped. "It's not appropriate for a young girl to waste her life playing nurse. She's doing it for pity. You can't let her guilt trip you, Dad." His words burned into me. Grandpa said nothing. Not a defense. Not a correction. Just silence. I stood there, heart pounding, realizing that even kindness could be twisted into manipulation when it came from the wrong person. When Grandpa passed away that spring, the air in the house felt too still, too sterile. The day of the will reading arrived like a storm cloud we all pretended not to see coming. The lawyer's office smelled of old paper and lemon polish. I sat beside my mother, my hands clasped tightly together, trying to steady the tremor in my fingers. My uncle and his family arrived late, Emma in her designer coat and Nathan looking bored, as if this were just another errand before brunch. The lawyer began reading, his voice monotone and detached. I barely heard the opening lines, formalities about dates and signatures. But then the words that followed carved into me like ice. "I hereby leave the family house, properties, and all financial assets to my grandchildren, Emma Mitchell and Nathan Mitchell." My mother's breath caught. "There must be some mistake," she whispered. "Lily took care of him for months." But the lawyer only looked at her with polite regret. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Taylor. This is the signed and notarized will." It felt like the air had been punched out of my chest. My cousins exchanged glances, trying to mask their satisfaction. Emma, ever the actress, leaned forward and said sweetly, "Grandpa always said Lily had a good heart. That's something money can't buy." Her words dripped with condescension. Nathan smirked behind her. My mother's grip on my hand tightened until it hurt. When we walked out of that office, the world seemed muted. Even the sky looked dull. I remember standing outside the building, watching Emma pose for a photo beside her new car, probably thinking about how she'd post about her beloved grandfather's memory later that day. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come. My mother turned to me, eyes glassy. "He loved you, Lily," she murmured. "He just got confused." I nodded, but inside, something cracked. That night, I went back to the house. My uncle had given us permission to collect our things before his children officially took over. The living room was stripped of warmth, the curtains drawn, the air stale. I walked through the hallway lined with family portraits. Grandpa in his military uniform, Grandma in her garden hat, Emma and Nathan smiling in every frame. I wasn't in a single one. It was like walking through a museum where my existence had been edited out. In the kitchen, I found one of Grandma's vases still filled with dried roses. She used to say they reminded her that beauty didn't disappear, it just changed shape. I wondered what she'd think now, seeing how her love had narrowed to just 2 grandchildren while I stood in the shadows. I climbed the stairs slowly, each creak echoing louder than the last. Grandpa's room was just as we'd left it, bed neatly made, his reading glasses on the nightstand, the faint scent of eucalyptus from the ointment I used to rub on his chest. I sat in his old chair, the one by the window overlooking the garden, and let my thoughts unravel. I tried to convince myself that material things didn't matter, that I had my dignity, my education, my future, but the truth was uglier. It wasn't about the money or the house, it was about being chosen, being acknowledged. I had spent years giving them everything I could, my time, my care, my love, and in the end, they gave me silence. As the night deepened, the moonlight spilled across the wooden floor, illuminating the dust in the air like tiny ghosts. I whispered to the empty room, "Why wasn't I enough?" The words hung there, unanswered, absorbed into the walls that had witnessed my childhood. When I finally stood to leave, I looked back one last time. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a flicker of light on the bookshelf, a glint reflecting off something metallic. But when I stepped closer, there was nothing there. Just shadows. Still, a strange feeling settled over me, a whisper I couldn't name, as though the house itself wasn't done with me yet. I walked out, closing the door behind me, thinking that this was the end of my story with them. But deep down, something told me it wasn't over. Some truths, no matter how deeply they're buried, have a way of clawing their way back to light. And though I didn't know it yet, the real story, my story, was just beginning. The house looked different now, emptier, colder, as if it had exhaled all its warmth after Grandpa's death. Months had passed since the will was read, yet the sting of that day hadn't faded. My mother and I were back only because the lawyer allowed us to collect a few personal keepsakes, things that, as he phrased it, held no monetary value. The words tasted bitter. To them, this house was a prize to be divided. To me, it was the only place that still smelled of memory, the mix of lavender soap, pipe tobacco, and the faint musk of old books. Emma and Nathan were due to move in soon. They had already sent decorators to modernize the property, which meant stripping it of everything that made it feel alive. I watched workers carry away furniture as though they were erasing traces of our family, one item at a time. My mother stayed downstairs, quietly packing some of Grandma's china into a cardboard box. She handled each teacup with care, tracing the gold-rimmed edges like they were relics from another life. I went upstairs, drawn toward the attic, a place I hadn't been in years. The attic door creaked open, releasing a cloud of dust and nostalgia. The sunlight that filtered through the small window cut across the space like an old photograph, faded, fragmented, and fragile. I started with the bookshelves near the far wall. Grandma had kept her novels and diaries there, all arranged by color. Even in her coldness, she had loved order. I pulled book after book, stacking them carefully, but something about the shelf bothered me. It wasn't flush with the wall. It wobbled slightly, as if something was lodged behind it. Curiosity overcame me. I pushed aside the books and found a small carved wooden box wedged behind the trunk that once held Grandpa's army coat. The box was coated in dust, its hinges rusted and dull, the carvings faintly visible, floral swirls surrounding a heart. My pulse quickened. Grandma's handwriting was etched faintly on the lid. For Lily. For a long moment, I just stared at it. No one in this house had ever left me anything. Not a gift, not a note, not a gesture. My fingers trembled as I wiped away the dust. The lid resisted at first, then gave way with a soft creak. Inside was a bundle of yellowed envelopes tied with a faded silk ribbon, their edges fragile like they might crumble if I breathed too hard. I lifted the top envelope and froze. My name, Lily, written in Grandma's looping script. My throat tightened. The attic around me seemed to fade away until all I could see was that one word. I sat on the wooden floor, the old boards cold beneath my legs, and unfolded the letter. The paper was thin, the ink slightly smudged, but the words were unmistakably hers. My dearest Lily, if you are reading this, it means time has taken me before I could make things right. There is something you must know about the will. I never wanted it this way. Years ago, your uncle tricked your grandfather into changing. He told us lies about you and your mother, claiming you only stayed with us for money. We believed him then, and it's the greatest regret of my life. I tried to change it back, but your grandfather's health declined too quickly. I hid this letter, hoping someday the truth would find its way to you. Inside the small chest under my bed, you'll find the documents your grandfather never finished signing. They were meant to return your rightful inheritance. Forgive me for my silence. Grandma. I read it once, then again, then again. My mind refused to absorb it all at once. My grandmother, the same woman who had never hugged me, who used to praise Emma while I cleared the dishes, had written a letter filled with regret and apology. She had wanted to make things right. The attic felt heavier, as though every box and trunk was holding its breath with me. I looked at the letter again, the words trembling in my hands. All those years of wondering why she didn't love me. Why? She looked at me like a stranger at her table. It wasn't hate. It was guilt. A guilt she carried until her last breath. Heart pounding, I bolted downstairs, letter clutched in my fist. Mom! I shouted. She looked up from the kitchen table, startled, as I stumbled into the room. What is it? She asked, her voice already shaking. I handed her the letter. She read it slowly, her lips parting in disbelief. When she finished, she sank into a chair, the color draining from her face. Your uncle lied to them, she whispered. He made them think we were after their money. That's why they pushed us away. Her hands trembled as she passed the letter back to me. I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. Vindication. She mentioned a chest under her bed, I said, already moving toward the stairs. My mother followed without a word. In Grandma's room, the air was thick with the scent of mothballs and old perfume. The bed was neatly made, the quilt folded with military precision. We knelt beside it, lifting the skirt of the bed frame. There it was. A small, ornate chest, the kind Grandma used to store her jewelry. The latch was stuck, so I grabbed a hairpin from my pocket and pried it open. The hinges groaned, protesting against time. Inside were several envelopes, a leather-bound folder, and a smaller sealed packet labeled, "To be opened by my attorney if anything happens to me." I picked up the folder first. Inside were bank statements, a draft of an amended will, and several handwritten notes in Grandpa's familiar script. My breath hitched when I saw one page in particular. It was a partially completed will, with Grandpa's signature on the bottom and a witness line left blank. The contents were clear. Half the estate was to go to my mother, and a portion specifically designated to me. But that wasn't all. Beneath the papers lay another folded sheet, one written in my uncle's unmistakable handwriting. It was dated 2 years before Grandpa's death. My hands shook as I read. I had to make changes to keep the estate in our hands. If Father finds out, I'll deny everything. He won't know the difference. His memory is slipping. This is for the best. A chill ran through me. My uncle knew exactly what he was doing. He had forged the path that erased me. I sat back, my mind spinning. My mother covered her mouth, whispering, "Oh my God." Tears welled in her eyes. Not the kind that came from sadness, but from long overdue truth. "He stole everything from us," she murmured. "And your grandparents believed him." We spread the documents on the bed, each piece telling a story we'd never been allowed to know. Grandma's letter wasn't just an apology, it was a confession. Grandpa's draft wasn't just paperwork, it was proof. Proof that we weren't crazy, that the years of being overlooked had been built on manipulation and lies. As the evening light faded, I sat in Grandma's room surrounded by the evidence of her guilt and my uncle's deceit. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen, validated. My existence had been buried under someone else's greed. But here, in my hands, was the truth they tried to bury with it. Later that night, I brought everything back to my room. The letter, the draft, the confession. I spread them out on my desk under the dim glow of the lamp. My mother had gone to bed, emotionally drained, but I couldn't sleep. I traced Grandma's handwriting with my fingers, tears blurring the ink. The silence in the room felt different now. Not empty, just waiting. I thought about all the times I'd wished for her love, her approval. Maybe this was it. Maybe this letter, written in shaky hands and hidden away for years, was her way of saying she finally saw me. The weight of it all was overwhelming, yet strangely freeing. The house that once felt like a tomb of memories now felt like a map. Each room holding secrets, each object whispering truth. I wasn't sure what I would do next, but I knew one thing for certain. This was no coincidence. The universe, or maybe Grandma's ghost, had led me to this discovery at exactly the right time. Outside the window, the wind rattled the trees, and the old house creaked in response. I looked around, whispering into the still air. You wanted me to find it, didn't you? The silence felt like an answer. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't feel small or forgotten. I stared at the papers spread before me, a quiet fire building in my chest. They had stolen my name from the family legacy, but I had just found the key to reclaiming it. Before turning off the light, I tucked Grandma's letter into a frame on my nightstand, right where the morning sun would hit it. I wanted to wake up to her words. I wanted to remember that even in betrayal, truth has its own way of finding light. And for the first time in my life, I whispered to my reflection, "You're not forgotten, Lily. Not anymore." When the truth came out, it didn't come quietly. It came like thunder after years of suffocating silence. I had spent so long thinking justice was something reserved for other people, for stories in books or courtroom dramas. But now, standing in the lawyer S office with my grandmother, S letter in one hand and the forged documents in the other, I realized that justice sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. A trembling signature, an old box hidden behind dust and time, a truth whispered through guilt and regret. The lawyer looked pale as he flipped through the pages. "Where did you find these?" he asked, his voice strained, almost fearful. His polished composure had cracked. "In the house," I said evenly. though my heart was racing. The house my cousins were about to inherit. The house my grandfather meant to give us all. He rubbed his temple, scanning the handwriting, the bank statements, the confession note from my uncle. "This is serious, Lily. If this is authentic, it changes everything." "It is authentic," I said firmly. "I'm not here for your doubt. I'm here for the truth." He nodded slowly, already reaching for his phone to call for verification. My mother sat beside me, her eyes red from crying, but her expression steeled with something I hadn't seen in her in years: resolve. For the first time, she wasn't the woman they had made small. She was a mother reclaiming her name. Within a week, an investigation was launched. The documents were examined by handwriting experts. The lawyer, now visibly uneasy, confirmed that my uncle's handwriting matched the confession note. The incomplete will, though unsigned by witnesses, aligned perfectly with Grandpa's earlier records. There was no mistaking his true intention. The amended draft listed not only my mother and me, but also an updated division of assets meant to balance the inheritance among all grandchildren. My uncle's manipulation had changed everything. When news reached my uncle's family, chaos erupted. Emma called me first. "You're unbelievable," she hissed. "How dare you dig through their things? Grandma wouldn't have wanted this drama." I laughed softly. "Grandma wanted the truth. I just found it." Nathan followed with his own tirade, claiming I was after money, that I was using sympathy to get attention. "You think this will make people like you?" he said. "You'll always be the outsider." I let him talk until he ran out of words. "You're right," I replied calmly. "I was the outsider, but not anymore." The next few weeks blurred into a series of meetings, statements, and court filings. My Uncle S.'s arrogance began to falter when he realized the gravity of what we uncovered. The lawyer who had overseen the will had kept all the original files, and those records now painted a timeline of deceit. My uncle had submitted documents on Grandpa L.'s behalf even after his cognitive decline had been medically noted. It was forgery, plain and simple. When the case went to a hearing, I stood in the courthouse corridor, clutching Grandma's letter like armor. My mother was beside me, silent but fierce. Across the hallway, my uncle whispered frantically to his attorney. Emma and Nathan sat behind him, their expressions brittle, their confidence unraveling. Inside the courtroom, the judge, a composed woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, listened as the evidence was laid out. My attorney read the timeline: the original will, the draft revisions, the forged alterations. When Grandma's letter was presented, the air changed. It was as if her voice echoed through the room, confessing her guilt and exposing his betrayal all at once. I was called to the stand to testify. My hands trembled slightly as I held the letter, but my voice didn't waver. "I took care of my grandfather in his last months," I said, meeting the judge's gaze. "I never asked for anything. I thought being there for him was enough. But when I found this letter, I realized my grandparents had tried to make things right before it was too late. My uncle made sure they couldn't." My uncle shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His lawyer objected, but the judge raised a hand, silencing him. "Continue," she said. I swallowed hard. "This isn't about inheritance," I continued. "It's about truth. About a man who manipulated his parents, love, and a woman who spent her final years regretting it. I'm not asking for more than what my grandparents intended. I'm just asking for their voices to be heard." When I finished, the room was silent. Even Emma looked down, her usual smirk gone. My mother's eyes glistened with pride, and I felt something I hadn't in years: peace. The judge took her time. Weeks later, the ruling came in a letter of its own, a formal decree that felt like a long-awaited breath. The court found sufficient evidence of will tampering and forgery. The estate was frozen pending redistribution according to the original intent. My uncle faced legal consequences for falsifying documents. The family house, the very symbol of my exclusion, was restored to my name, as my grandmother had intended. When I walked into that house again, keys in hand, the world outside was bright with afternoon sunlight. Dust motes drifted through the air, golden and slow. I stood in the living room, the one that used to echo with laughter that wasn't meant for me, and I realized how different it felt. It wasn't heavy anymore. The walls didn't feel like they were watching me. They felt like they were welcoming me home. I placed Grandma's letter on the mantel, framing it in glass to preserve the ink. Her words looked softer now, less burdened. Maybe, wherever she was, she could finally rest, knowing her truth was no longer hidden in the dark. I whispered to the quiet room, "You made mistakes, Grandma, but you tried to fix them. That's more than most people ever do." Outside, I could hear the sound of children laughing as they passed by the front gate. The same gate I used to stand behind as a girl, watching my cousins ride their new bikes while I sat on the porch steps. I smiled, realizing how far I'd come. The house no longer belonged to pain, it belonged to healing. Over the next few months, I made small changes to the home. I didn't tear it apart or redecorate it like Emma wanted to. I restored it. I polished Grandpa's old watch and placed it by the window. I kept Grandma's rose vase filled with fresh flowers, not the wilted ones she'd left behind. I painted the attic walls, but I kept the little wooden box on a shelf, the one that had started it all. Sometimes I'd sit in the garden at dusk, reading her letter again. Each time I found new meaning in her words. "Forgive me for my silence," she'd written. And every time I read it, I whispered back, "I do." But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. The rest of the family drifted away after the ruling. My uncle moved to another city, his reputation stained. Emma and Nathan sent me a few half-hearted messages, some filled with resentment, others with awkward attempts at peace. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The truth had already spoken for itself. One afternoon, I hosted a small gathering in the garden. Just my mother, a few close friends, and the neighbors who had known my grandparents. We shared tea, laughter, and stories. Someone asked if I ever regretted digging up the past. I smiled and said, "The past doesn't stay buried just because we ignore it. It waits, and when it's ready, it finds its way home." That night, I sat alone in the living room, watching the sunset cast amber light across the mantel. The framed letter glowed faintly. I realized that the revenge I thought I wanted, the kind that would humiliate those who wronged me, wasn't the kind I got. What I received instead was far greater: closure. The kind that doesn't roar, but hums quietly like peace. I had once believed I was forgotten, erased, invisible. But in the end, the truth itself became my witness. My grandmother's letter, my grandfather's unfinished will. They had spoken for me when no one else would. I ran my hand along the smooth edge of the mantel and whispered to the air, "Justice doesn't always come in courtrooms. Sometimes it comes when the once empty hands finally hold proof of their worth." Outside, the wind rustled through the rose bushes, scattering petals across the garden path. The scent of them drifted through the open window, mingling with the warmth of the fading sun. I looked around at the house that had once held only sorrow and thought, this is what healing looks like. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the unchosen granddaughter anymore. I felt like the one who stayed long enough to uncover the truth, long enough to turn pain into peace. The one who proved that even in the darkest corners of family betrayal, light can still find its way through. One hidden letter at a time.